Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive on Sergey Brin, the mastermind behind Google. We've got some really interesting stuff to go through today. It's a wild story.
It really is. It's kind of amazing how one person's life can have such a huge impact on pretty much everyone.
For sure. Okay, so let's rewind the clock a bit to 1979. Imagine you're 6 years old, you have to leave everything you know behind and start over in a new country with your family. That's exactly what happened to Sergey Brin. And they only had $800 and one single suitcase. It's hard to even imagine. I wonder if that kind of experience maybe ignited his ambition.
Yeah, I mean, upheaval like that can make some people really afraid to take risks, but sometimes it can push people to build resilience and push them to make something of themselves. I think it's really interesting to think about how that experience might have shaped his worldview and influenced everything that came after.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially since he went on to create a company that totally changed the world. His dad was a mathematician, wasn't he?
Right. Yeah, and he really encouraged Sergey's, natural talent with math. So while other kids were out playing, he was already starting to tackle complex problems. That's quite a head start.
It's pretty incredible. And get this, I read that Stanford actually rejected Brin for their undergrad program. Can you believe that? The guy who ended up revolutionizing how we search for information wasn't good enough for Stanford at first.
Right. It's crazy. I mean, it just shows you that traditional measures of success don't always tell the whole story. But you know what? Stanford did eventually accept him for their PhD program. So,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So maybe they realized they made a mistake, or maybe Brin used that rejection as motivation to just push himself harder. What do you think?
You know what? I think you're right. I think he probably used that as fuel. It seems like that's just part of who he is. Okay, so fast forward to the mid-90s. We're at Stanford in the computer science department. Brin meets Larry Page. And from what I've read, it wasn't exactly love at first sight.
No, not really. From what I've heard, they were complete opposites. Brin was kind of the big picture idea guy, while Page was more the meticulous engineer focused on turning those ideas into reality.
You'd think that would be a recipe for disaster, but somehow they managed to turn that friction into something really productive.
It makes you wonder if a little bit of conflict can actually be a good thing, right?
Yeah, maybe sometimes. That's a good argument for being open to different perspectives and not being afraid of a little disagreement. And remember, this was way back when Alta Vista and Yahoo were the big names in search. They were mostly just matching keywords. But Brin and Page, they had a totally different idea. They wanted to use backlinks to figure out which websites were more important. It was a pretty radical idea at the time.
And to think Google, this multi-trillion-dollar company, started as this little project called Backrub, running on servers in Larry Page's dorm room. They even crashed Stanford's entire network with it at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a pretty humble beginning for a company that basically ended up running the internet. Yeah. And what's even crazier is that they actually tried to sell Google for just $1 million back in 1999.
Really?
Yeah. Big companies like Yahoo and Kata, they turned it down.
Right.
And even their own professor called it a parlor trick. Can you believe that? Talk about a missed opportunity. And then just 5 years later, Google went public, and it was valued at something like $23 billion.
I mean, what were those companies thinking? But it really says something about Brin's vision.
Yeah.
He saw something that no one else did. He wasn't afraid to do things differently.
Absolutely. And that kind of, relentless belief in himself. That's what's so fascinating about him. And you see it not just in his work, but also in his personality, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the Google antics, right? When he coded that first Google Doodle, the Burning Man stick figure, and he would just skate around the office calling himself the Prince of Google.
Yeah. And remember when he hacked into the iPhone to get Google Maps on there before Steve Jobs even gave permission?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Some people might just think of those things as silly quirks. But I think it's all connected to his drive to innovate. He doesn't let rules or expectations get in the way of his thinking.
I agree. It's he sees the world as this big puzzle, and he just wants to figure out how it all works and find new ways to approach things. And he's not afraid to have fun while he's doing it. That playfulness, it could be the key to how he comes up with such out-of-the-box ideas. He's willing to experiment and push the boundaries a little bit. He doesn't mind poking fun at the establishment either. It seems like this willingness to challenge things is a big part of his story.
Definitely. It's he sees the world as this giant puzzle that he has to solve, and he's always trying to find new creative ways to do it.
Exactly. And maybe that brings us to one of the most well-known examples of Brin's outside-the-box thinking, Google Glass. I mean, it was a product that was ahead of its time for sure. It got a lot of criticism, but Brin just kept going. He saw it as a way to learn, This is where his idea of failure as data comes from.
It's a cool concept, but is it always realistic? I mean, are there times when you shouldn't look at failure as data?
That's a good point. I think there's definitely value in, seeing setbacks as opportunities to learn and improve. But I think there's also a danger in becoming too detached from, the human side of things. Sometimes failure can be a really tough experience, and we have to acknowledge that too.
Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of pushing boundaries, let's talk about GoogleX Brin's Moonshot Factory, where they're working on some seriously ambitious projects.
GoogleX is all about developing brand new technologies that could potentially solve some of the world's biggest problems. And just so everyone knows, a moonshot is like a project that's super ambitious, maybe even seems impossible, but it has the potential to totally change the world.
It's kind of like Google itself when you think about it.
Yeah, totally. And they've got projects working on everything from self-driving cars with Waymo to those internet beaming balloons with Loon, and even things like renewable energy and life extension. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. I mean, it's just incredible to think about the scope of what they're doing. It all goes back to Brin's drive to solve problems and to push the limits of what's possible. He's not afraid to take risks and invest in things that sound like they're straight out of science fiction.
Right. And I think we have to talk about something that often gets overshadowed by all the tech achievements, and that's Brin's philanthropy. This is where we see another side to him.
Yeah, it's almost like he's a superhero with a secret identity, right? Like, on one hand, you have this brilliant, maybe a little eccentric innovator, and then on the other, you have this incredibly compassionate person who wants to make a difference. It's kind of an interesting contrast.
Yeah, and I think it shows how complex he is as a person. He's not just motivated by, making money or building cool tech. He actually wants to use his wealth and influence to make the world a better place.
And he's tackling some pretty big issues too, right? Like Parkinson's research, CRISPR, and the ethical implications of AI.
Yeah, and his focus on Parkinson's is really personal, actually. Brin found out that he carries a gene that puts him at a much higher risk of developing the disease. So instead of being afraid, he decided to fight back. He's put a lot of resources into research, and he's a big advocate for prevention. It's a pretty amazing example of someone taking control of their own future.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he's using his problem-solving skills in his own life.
Yeah.
He took something scary and turned it into a positive force for change. You know what else I think is interesting? His stance on CRISPR technology. Just to give everyone a quick overview, CRISPR is this gene editing tool that could potentially cure genetic diseases.
Right.
But it also brings up some ethical questions.
Yeah, totally. It's like we're opening at this whole new world of possibilities, but there are risks too.
So Brin, he sees the huge potential of CRISPR, but he's also really aware of the ethical stuff. It's not just about what we can do, but also what we should do. That kind of thoughtful approach is really important when we're talking about such powerful tech.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to this quote from Brin where he said, obviously everyone wants to be successful, but I won't be looked back on as being very innovative, very trusted, and ethical.
It's a pretty powerful statement, especially coming from someone who could easily just sit back and relax and enjoy his wealth, But it seems like Brin is driven by something bigger than just himself. He wants to leave a mark on the world that goes way beyond Google and technology.
Absolutely. It's like he wants to, really make a difference, like make a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs would say.
Exactly. And that brings us to a question for all of you listening. How does Brin's approach to innovation and, doing good in the world, how does that resonate with you? What parts of his story do you find inspiring or, thought-provoking?
Something to think about.
We're going to dive into that more in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll talk about how Brin tackles those big challenges and maybe how his story can inspire all of us to think bigger about our own goals and ambitions. We'll see you soon.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Sergey Brin. So picking up where we left off last time, I think it's really interesting to look at Brin's ability to not only spot trends, but to actually do something about them. Like, he doesn't just talk about the future. He actually goes out and tries to shape it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's one thing to, see where things are headed, but it takes a special kind of person to actually, turn those ideas into something real. And I think his work with GoogleX is a perfect example of that.
For sure. GoogleX is like a testing ground for all of his crazy ideas. They're working on things that sound like science fiction. Self-driving cars, with Waymo, internet beaming balloons, with Loon, even stuff like renewable energy and life extension.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it.
It really is. And what's impressive is that Brin isn't just, throwing money at these projects and hoping for the best. He's really involved in how they develop, and he pushes his teams to think bigger and to be bolder.
You know, it reminds me of something Elon Musk said about aiming for Mars, even if you only make it to the moon. It's that kind of, thinking that sets Brin apart. He's not afraid to go for those big goals.
Right, and it's not just about the tech itself. It's about what these projects could mean for humanity. Imagine a world without traffic accidents because of self-driving cars, or everyone having internet access even in the most remote places. A world powered by renewable energy. I mean, that's a pretty exciting future. And Brin is actually trying to make it happen. But of course, it's not always easy, right? Like, remember Google Glass?
Oh, yeah.
You got a lot of people scratching their heads, and some even made fun of it. But Brin didn't let that stop him. He saw it as a chance to learn a stepping stone to something better.
It's a good point. So that brings us back to his whole failure as data thing. Do you think that's always a healthy way to look at things? I mean, shouldn't we be careful about just brushing off failure?
Yeah, I think it's a good perspective to have, especially in the tech world, where things move so fast. But you're right, we have to be careful. I mean, not all failures are the same. Some failures can be really, devastating, especially when we're talking about sensitive technologies like AI or gene editing.
That's true. It's all about finding that balance between taking risks and, being responsible with innovation, which I think brings us to another really important part of Brin's work, his focus on the ethical side of technology, especially AI.
And this is where his philanthropy really shines. He's not just interested in making cool gadgets. He really cares about what kind of impact they'll have on society.
Yeah, we touched on that before, but let's dig a little deeper. You mentioned that his interest in Parkinson's research is really personal because of his own genes. What are some of the specific things he's doing in that area?
Well, he's a big supporter of the Michael J. Fox Foundation. They're working hard to find a cure for Parkinson's. He's also investing a lot in research on things like stem cell therapy and other really advanced treatments. And he's not just writing checks. He's really involved in, raising awareness about the disease and pushing for more government support.
It's really cool to see that. It would be easy for someone like him to just, donate money and move on, but he's really committed to actually making a difference. And that commitment also shows in his work with CRISPR. It's that amazing gene editing tool that could cure so many diseases. But it also raises some serious ethical questions.
It does. It's like we're opening Pandora's box, right? We have this incredible power, but we have to be super careful about how we use it.
Sure.
And Brin gets that. He's talked a lot about, being really thoughtful and responsible with this technology. He's even suggested that there should be a global pause on some uses of CRISPR, especially anything that has to do with editing human embryos, sperm, or eggs.
Right, because that would mean changing the genes of future generations, which is where things get really complicated ethically.
Exactly. It brings up all these questions like, who gets to decide what genes are good or bad? And, are we going to end up with a society where people are trying to engineer certain traits? It's a really slippery slope. And Brin seems to understand that we need to proceed carefully.
Yeah, I agree. It's great to see a leader in the tech world who isn't just obsessed with, what can we do, but also with why should we do it and how should we do it.
I think that's a perspective we really need more of in the tech industry. We need more people who are willing to think about the ethical implications of their work and put the well-being of society first, along with the technological advances.
Absolutely. There's a quote from Brin that I think sums it up really well. He said, "We want to use technology to make the world a better place, but we also need to be mindful of the unintended consequences and ensure that technology is used for good."
It's a great reminder for all of us, not just people in tech. I mean, technology is advancing so quickly that it's really important for everyone to be part of the conversation about how it's affecting our lives, our values, our future.
Yeah, definitely. And Brin is definitely trying to start that conversation through his philanthropy, his public statements, even his investments.
That's right. And that brings us to another fascinating part of his story. His focus on the future, not just the future of technology, but the future of humanity in the universe.
Yeah. You're talking about his interest in space exploration, right? I read that he's a big investor in SpaceX, Elon Musk's company.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about the adventure of going to space. Brin actually sees it as crucial for the survival of our species in the long run. He thinks we need to become a multi-planetary species to deal with the risks of things like climate change, resource depletion, and, all these other existential threats.
Wow, it's a pretty bold vision.
It is. But it's a vision that a lot of smart people in science and tech share. It's a reminder that we're not just citizens of one country or even one planet. We're citizens of the universe. And maybe it's time we started acting like it.
It's a powerful thought. It makes you wonder if we could zoom out and look at ourselves from, a cosmic perspective. How would we judge our progress? What are the things we've done really well and what are we still messing up?
Those are really good questions. And I think Brin would encourage us to not only ask them, but to actually try to find the answers through exploration, innovation, and, just a constant pursuit of knowledge.
I think that's a perfect way to transition into our final segment. We're going to talk about what we can all learn from Sergey Brin's incredible journey and how his story can inspire us to be better and do more with our lives. And welcome back to our deep dive on Sergey Brin. We've gone through a lot, from his childhood and escaping the Soviet Union to creating Google and all of his philanthropy, even his thoughts on humanity's future. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it really has. Sergey Brin's story, it's just amazing. It shows what humans can do. Ingenuity, resilience, that belief that things can be better. It's a story with a lot of lessons for all of us, no matter who we are or what we want to do.
I'm curious, what do you think is the most interesting part of his journey? What are some takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own lives?
One thing that really stands out to me is how he just goes for it. He's not afraid of big challenges.
Yeah.
Like from when he was a kid, he's been drawn to these really complex problems. He's always pushing the limits of what's possible. Most people would shy away from difficult things, but he doesn't.
Yeah, it's like he sees roadblocks as opportunities instead. And I think that mindset has helped him so much throughout his life, from his school days to starting Google and even his charity work.
Exactly. He's not someone who just wants to keep things the same. He really wants to change the world for the better, And that's something we can all learn from. It doesn't matter what we do or what we're interested in.
It's about finding that thing you're passionate about, that problem you can't stop thinking about, and then using that energy to do something good, whether it's a big change or a small one.
Right. And I think it's also important to point out that he's not afraid to take risks. He knows that you can't innovate without failing sometimes. It's part of the process. And it's not something to be scared of. It's a chance to learn and try again.
It's that whole fail fast, fail often thing that you hear so much in Silicon Valley. But it's not just about failing, it's about what you do after you fail. Brin uses those failures as information, to help him find better solutions.
And it's not just in tech either. He does the same thing with his philanthropy. He's not just randomly donating money. He's really strategic about it. He supports projects that are based on good research and have a real chance of making a difference.
It's about being smart and thoughtful with your actions, whether you're building a company, giving money to a cause, or just trying to make your community a little better. It's about asking, what am I trying to fix here, and what's the best way to do it?
I think another important lesson from Brin's story is to think big, to not be afraid to challenge what everyone else thinks and to go after ideas that might seem crazy or impossible at first.
He's a perfect example of what can happen when you have a big vision and then you actually go after it. I mean, not everyone has the kind of money and resources that he does, but we can all try to think like him, to be willing to push the limits a little bit.
Yeah, it's about getting out of your comfort zone, questioning what you think you know, and looking for different perspectives. It's about being curious, always learning new things, and surrounding yourself with people who make you think in new ways.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Sergey Brin's life, I want to leave you all with this question. What impossible problem would you try to solve if you had all the resources in the same mindset as Sergey Brin?
It's something to really think about. Because the truth is, we all have the potential to make a real difference in the world. It all starts with a little curiosity, the willingness to dream big, and the courage to actually do something.
Sergey Brin's story shows us that even in a world that can feel really complicated and overwhelming, we can still make a difference. So keep learning, keep exploring, and never be afraid to think big and to be bold.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Sergey Brin. Until next time.